Alright, we're going to talk about diagonals and quadrilaterals. So this is what your page is going to look like by the time you're done. Make sure that you've got the word diagonals written here because that's what we're focusing on. By the time you're done, you'll have all of these written in here. Don't worry about having them done yet. And then we're going to have some stuff written underneath the flaps. So let's get started with quadrilaterals. We'll start at the top of the family tree. Alright, there's really not that much special in the diagonals of quadrilaterals, but let's go ahead and draw them on here. So there's your quadrilaterals. They don't make a right angle. They're not going to be congruent, anything like that. Let's go ahead and lift the flap. Alright, when you lift the flap, the only thing we're going to write underneath here is none. There's nothing important about the diagonals and quadrilaterals. Now, I want you to move over to the other side of the page. We're going to move to the parallelogram next. Alright, I want you to draw some diagonals on parallelograms. Now, it's really important that we get them straight because that's going to be easier for you to recognize in the long run. So find you a straight edge somewhere at home. You can use a ruler, you can use a book, anything that's going to have a straight edge. And go ahead and draw those in there. Now, the diagonals in a parallelogram are going to bisect each other. So we're going to put some congruent marks, but they need to look just, whoops, not like that. They need to look just like this because they're not all congruent to each other, but because they bisect each other, they create two congruent segments here and here and here and here. Okay, so don't worry about writing those circles. Now, let's go ahead and lift the flap. And on the inside of this flap here, we're going to go ahead and say the properties of the diagonals. So I want you to write that the diagonals bisect each other. And one other thing, if they bisect each other, then that means that they intersect at the midpoint. Okay, let's look at the properties of the parallelogram. So we already drew them on there and talked about them, but underneath I want you to actually write what the properties are. The diagonals in a parallelogram bisect each other. So if the diagonals bisect each other, that means that the intersection, or they intersect at the midpoint. It's really important that you remember those two things about the diagonals of a parallelogram. Let's look at the diagonals of a rhombus now. Okay, first let's go ahead and draw them on there. So your diagonals are going to go, make sure you're doing this with a straight edge because you need to notice that in a rhombus, your diagonals, oh, I won't do it that way, I'll just draw it, always make a right angle. And they are going to bisect each other because it still carries on the same properties of the parallelogram. We're only adding the perpendicular part. So let's go ahead and flip it up and let's write those properties underneath the rhombus. Okay, so lift up your flap and we're going to write that. Try to write it so it stays under your flap, but that's okay if you go outside a little bit. Are perpendicular. So if you forgot what that little symbol means, go ahead and write perpendicular in there. But that upside down T means perpendicular. The diagonals are perpendicular. The diagonals bisect each other, just like in a parallelogram. And if the diagonals bisect each other, then they intersect at the midpoint. So hopefully you can fit all of yours under that flap. I had to write a little bit bigger. So those are the three things you need to remember about a rhombus. Let's go ahead and look at the rectangle now. Alright, let's get a straight edge and go ahead and draw the diagonals from the opposite angles in a rectangle. Now this time in a rectangle, all of your segments are going to be congruent because the diagonals are congruent and they bisect each other. Let's go ahead and write that underneath our flap. So lift up your flap, and the diagonals in a rectangle are congruent. That's one. We also know that, just like a parallelogram, that the diagonals bisect each other. And because the diagonals bisect each other, they are going to intersect at the midpoints. So those are the three things about the rectangle. All right, we have one left. Let's look at the perfect square now. Here's a square. Let's go ahead and draw our diagonals on there with a straight edge. And the diagonals are going to take on all the properties of the rhombus, so we've got a right angle, and all the properties of a rectangle, so they're going to all be congruent. So go ahead and lift that flap, and when you lift it, let's go ahead and, instead of writing everything, let's write same as rhombus. And a square has all the properties of a rectangle, so it's going to be same as a rectangle. But the cool thing about a square is, if you look, it makes 4 triangles, and those triangles are pretty special. They're isosceles right triangles. Which means if it's an isosceles right triangle, it's very special. It's always a 45, 45, 90. So go back and look at your, do you see it now? You see how this is my right angle? These are congruent, so here's your 45, your 45, and your 90. So let's go ahead and write that in every one of those triangles. We have a 45, 45, 90. Do you see why the square is so perfect now? Okay, and you are done. This is what your journal should look like now. And there's your journal. So I will see you in class, and we'll practice that soon.